Welcome to Leadership Unlocked, where we uncover the pivotal stories that shape extraordinary leaders. I'm Dusty Holcomb, and on this show, we don't just talk about leadership, we decode it. Really, what we talk about is influence and how people have created influence in their lives and in their leadership. In every episode, we sit down with change makers who've walked through the fire, challenged the status quo, and emerged with wisdom worth sharing. These aren't just lessons, they're lived experiences. They are nuggets and pearls of wisdom, moments that have revealed a mindset, a resilience, and a clarity towards their ability to create impact. Today, you're going to hear one of those stories. She's redefining how e-commerce handles waste, turning almost perfect inventory into serious bottom line impact. With a mind shaped by philosophy and classic Russian history, and a heart wired for systems and sound, she's bringing clarity to the chaos of modern logistics. If you care about finding hidden value in your business or in your leadership, you're going to want to hear this. Let's get into it. This is Leadership Unlocked. Liesl, thank you so much for coming in today. Thanks for investing your time on a Friday morning. I hope that you've had plenty of coffee. If not, then I'm going to encourage you to keep drinking it as we chat. Thank you for taking time out to talk with us today.
I am so excited. So thanks so much.
Well, before we get into like your history and your background, like I've got a bazillion questions. One thing that I really like to ask all of our guests when we start off is, what is a leadership philosophy or a principle that you rely on every day?
It's going to sound very broad, but it's something I've honed into, I would say, the past few years. And I look for this in almost everybody I talk to, aside from or anyone I would hire or anyone that I would work closely with. I think the principle I look at is self-awareness. I think that is a must-have, even more so than a certain level of skill, a certain, smarts. I mean, of course, we all want that for every role. Self-awareness is the one thing that is of utmost importance, not just for a leader, but I think anybody that works with me or that I would want to work with.
That's really interesting. And is there a particular story of how you arrived there? Has it been an evolution to say like this is a kind of a first principle thing? What is it that has clued you in on the importance of self-awareness?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, this is something that I honed in I would say probably within the past 5 to 7 years. And I remember I was doing some work at a startup, and there's a little bit of friction between me and this person that I was working closely with. And it was a couple weeks, and I brought it up to one of the C-level folks, and his response to me, it was like, he is kind of a pain, we're frustrating and all that. He was like, but he is very self-aware. And I never heard that feedback before from anybody. But in this, obviously it still sticks into my head, and I keep on thinking about that. And it's almost like as soon as he said that to me, there was a very clear line in the sand in terms of the kind of person he is and the kind of character he had, and that it would be, I should even say just like a safe space to chat with him, even though maybe we would approach things a little bit intellectually, a little bit differently, or just even work-wise. We have very different work styles, but just and not just hearing it, I think absorbing it and really taking that in and saying, this is the kind of person he is. It allowed me to have a very candid conversation with him. And we are still good friends to this day. Like from that point on, it was like our relationship shifted. We still butted heads, but it was very much under mutual respect. And it grew into a really strong friendship.
I've never thought about self-awareness the way you just described it, as being kind of a key that unlocks a deeper relationship. And when you talk about that, like for someone to say, well, he's self-aware, and I'm not saying this about this person, but if you're dealing with someone and they're abrasive, or they come across in a way, and you have a chat and they're aware of that, and they can say, hey, look, I know that I'm abrasive. I know that I cut to the quick sometime. I'm aware of that. That creates a transparency and an authenticity and a realness. When you first started with self-awareness, I was thinking about, someone who is aware of their tics or trying to overcome them, but and that may be the case, but they're aware of them, and you can be aware of them, so you get on the same plane really quick. That's cool. I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, well, and I also think you may not be self-aware of how your actions impact others, but I think being able to be receptive, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, which is just like baseline empathy, right? But to your point, yeah, I really think it's a baseline quality that opens a space to have not only a safe relationship. I mean, goes for everybody, like not just coworkers, but whether it's like a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or friendship, but a safe relationship, but ultimately a more productive one. So for me, that's baseline.
That's cool. Well, thank you for giving us that baseline understanding of who you are. And I have to ask, like when you were a little girl and you're sitting there dreaming big about your life, did you think you were going to be a, multi-time entrepreneurial founder and, running an e-commerce company? What was your horizon from a point that you remember of what you wanted to be when you grew up, or where you thought your journey would take you?
I grew up with an older brother, almost 7 years older than me, right? And he was definitely your classic high achiever, very academically talented. And even though there was a fairly large gap, I mean, that was a tough thing. I mean, this is like a guy who would be in the papers because he got some like wild like score on the, on the standardized test or whatever. Like he was a national merit finalist. And especially if you think of Asian families, that was something that cast a long shadow. I remember even entering high school, people would remember him. So I think I always felt a little bit like, could I match up or could I keep up? But then at the same time, I think I always had, I don't know if I equated it to like eventually being a founder or starting something, but I think I always was a little bit offbeat. And maybe it was a way to carve out a space for myself that, and because let's call it what it is, like based on what my brother's skills were, I don't think I ever would have been like that, but that's okay. Like I was fine with sort of carving my own path. I mean, in terms of founder stuff, I mean, I was a kid, I mean, they weren't good, but I was a kid that like, at 6 years old, I had like a different sidewalk business every summer. You know what I mean? Like I would just drag the table. And it's just like dumb stuff. But I think it was like, just, trying something and setting up shop and seeing what happened. And no one ever bought anything. But I mean, that was something that I still remember. Even one of my best friends still reminds me of that because I would drag her along.
I love that. I'm laughing because my son is 8, and it's every weekend. I think he's trying to come up with another hustle. A few weeks ago, it was a lemonade stand, and he comes in the house. I made $28, and I'm going, wait a minute, dude, how'd you do that? And like, oh no, we're taking out the cost of goods sold here. You need to understand margin. You need to and then they're trying to sell pictures. He and his buddies. It's just funny, and I love it. And when kids, how these little things that you don't even think about impact you. You talking about your brother. I recently read an article about a gentleman who's like, it's almost like the kid you don't want to be the sibling of, because he was a Navy SEAL, and then he became a Harvard MD, and now he's all of these things. I'm like you can't live up to that shadow. This guy's done everything, and I think now he's an astronaut. Like that's the next level of his accomplishment, and you carving out your space to do your thing in your way is super cool. All right. I have to ask this question because I was looking at your background, an undergraduate degree in Russian and Soviet history. Like, what took you there? Why that specificity? What'd you think you were going to do? What was your goal there?
Oh, I mean, I was just a history major because I didn't know. Well, I will say, to be fair, my dad did say, so my dad taught finance, but he was great. And it's like, if you go to school, study something that teaches you how to think, not to like diminish anyone else what they study, but I think because for him, he studied accounting. He was like, don't get a degree in accounting, get a degree in something that teaches you how to think and how to write. So I always like story. So I studied history, and honestly, Russian history, I kind of fell into it because I remember I took a Russian history class, and it was one of my favorite classes. And then eventually the part 2 was getting into the Soviet era. But there was so much color, and specifically like with Peter the Great and how vibrant that society and culture was, that, growing up, you don't really hear about that because we were so much in the Soviet era, and you don't,
Mm.
equate that with Russia. But then if you dig several hundred years back, you realize like how much stuff can get buried just based on what you were taught, So it was just a whole new perspective on a country and a culture that I had never known before. So I really appreciate that. And frankly, Peter the Great was pretty entrepreneurial himself. He wanted to bring in new ways of thinking. I mean, probably like thinking and learning and arts and culture, and maybe even I would say like the early Roman Empire.
I love that your dad said, go study something that's going to teach you how to think. What did it do? Like, what were frameworks or tools or lessons that you learned in studying history that taught you how to think, or that you use today? I mean, you mentioned that you love to write, but like, what thinking patterns, what was it that unlocked for you?
I wish universities would embrace this, and maybe they do more now, but I wish they would embrace this in general more, is that someone told me always have a point of view, even though it might be wrong, or even though your conclusion might not be totally right. Always have a point of view. And I really like that ethos, and I'm not always great at it, but I always try to carry that through. And I think that's an aspect of being able to think critically about issues and problems and what's in front of you.
Yeah, I would imagine too that it helps you ask questions so that you can form a point of view. Your curious nature is going to help you say, my goal is to form an opinion. So what are the right questions to ask? What's the right research and information to ingest and understand so that I can form an opinion, even if it's wrong. And even if you agree to rechange or reframe it later on based on the presentation of new information.
And we should always be able to change our opinion. Like that's the beauty of thinking, right? And being human. I mean, opinions are there to be, changed and challenged. But I also wanted to say, you made me think, is because having a point of view, I think I definitely realized in school also how much people have their own biases, and how even professors, and there's one instance, I'm not gonna get into it, it's a little long-winded, but there's just one instance where it really bothered me because it was definitely coming. They had a critique about a paper or an opinion that I had, and it was obviously biased because of their own life choices and how they lived, and I didn't like that at all. And I thought that there wasn't a lot for that class in particular. There wasn't a lot of openness to think beyond one's perspective, and I think that's what universities are supposed to help you do. But in general, I think that's what my studies taught me.
Well, it's interesting when I think about, and we'll get to what you do now, but like the ability to change, the ability to evolve, the ability to learn, like that is, I would say, a first principle core of being an entrepreneur is, understanding what the world it looks like today, creating something, and then adjusting based on how it's received or acted in the market, and then continuing to adjust. But before we get to comeback goods, because we are going there, I'm really excited to talk about that. Walk us through your journey. What was it that, do you have any key moments of as you finish up undergraduate and you're figuring out what you want to do when you grow up? Were there any mentors, or were there any key inflection points in your journey that you can look back on now and go with, almost with, you never know, well, not never, but sometimes you don't see with clarity what's going on in your life at the moment, but it's only upon reflection that you can get that hindsight is 2020. Any key inflection points or moments of your leadership journey that you can look back on now and go, wow, that was really powerful, whether it was a mentor, whether it was a situation, whether it was something going on? Any that jumped to mind for you?
My dad ended up getting sick, and that brought me back to California. I was in New York at the time. That brought me back to California, and did some work there, like very unexpectedly. And then he got sick and ended up passing away. And it was a long, about 6 months, where he was in the hospital. I remember going back, and the night that he was dying, and he was in the equivalent of hospice. I remember calling my best friend and saying, "Tell me what to do," because I was by myself. My mom hadn't gotten there yet. My brother was like on his way. And I remember she said to me, like, I hope you never hold yourself back from doing what you really want to do. I mean, the fact that I can still remember this, and I spent 3 to 4 years. It was, at that stage in life, you're just kind of like, okay, I'm kind of moseying along, like, we'll see what that takes me. But it was definitely like, everyone says I was in an inertia, and it was definitely a jolt that made me take a turn. And I still remember that. And it didn't happen right away. I mean, he had passed away that night, and, there was just so much that was happening. And then I remember I moved closer to LA because I wanted to get closer to the tech scene. So this is like, I don't know, maybe like event number 2. I saved up some money, and I was like living at the time with my mom for a little bit. So I saved up, and then finally I moved closer to Los Angeles. I got involved with the startup scene. I remember that. And then I went to this one restaurant. I remember this. I was sitting at the bar, and we're still talk to this day. Like, if he sees this, he'll be like, that was me. I was sitting at the bar, and right next to me, this guy starts talking to me, just like, it was like during lunch hour, and there was no one there. He tells me he's a venture capitalist. I was like, oh, that's, I was like, oh, my ears perked up because I was always curious about that. That was in 2010. And I was like, okay, so he gave me his card, and I was like, oh, I want to learn more about this. He gave me his card. And then one of my other good friends always said, always follow up, always follow up. So I followed up with him. I wrote a really janky business plan for something, right, that can't even remember right now. It was just to get in front of him. And then I remember he said to me, like, I'm not going to give you money, but I will help you meet people. So he introduced me to a bunch of people, got involved with a couple early stage startups just to learn how it works. And then I met the founder of Zimments at an LA event, and that, kind of set the ball rolling and brought me back to New York in 2012.
Okay, so there's a couple pearls of wisdom in there, like when you're talking to your friend, the night your dad's passing away, and you hear never hold yourself back. I mean, that's one of those, whether that seed grew the next day or it was just something that germinated, that's one of those powerful life lessons. And it's easy. I think what I heard you talking about, and it really resonates with me, is it's so easy to get inertia and then to just get down a path. And then it's almost like there's guardrails, but those guardrails keep going higher and higher and higher. And then sooner or later, you can't even see over into the other lane, or you can't see the landscape because you just have so much inertia going down this highway that's kind of played out. So I love that that's something that you've identified and can reflect back on. And this other pearl of wisdom of always follow up. Like that, how easy it would have been for you to take the business card and go, like, there's no way he's ever going to actually respond to me, or, and not do the thing. Like little passing moments. And, oh, I'm not going to give you money, but I'll introduce you to people. Like, that's pretty cool.
What you said about inertia is very true. And I have always said this, even it was very sad and unfortunate, but my dad passing in some ways was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. At a pretty young age, where I was kind of on this career path, but I knew I wasn't happy. It was okay at it. I wasn't happy. It wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but I had in some ways it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It brought me back to California. But then, about following up, I think there was another friend of mine that said that. She was like, I'll always follow up, always follow up. Like, because you just never know. And that's true. I always say that. We say that. I think founders are really good about that, because you never know what path is going to lead to something very cool. And you hit so many walls in what you do. And sometimes the most unassuming connection turns into something very interesting. And that's right. It's like, never, going back to Bobby says, never make assumptions on people. I've met people that I had absolutely adored and loved. I thought we had a great connection, and then, whatever, it just kind of fizzled out or didn't work. And then other people, I just never thought we would be working together in that way. And it turns out to be like some of the most fruitful relationships work-wise.
So Tell us what you're doing now. Like you and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and I've been fascinated with your purpose and your mission. And hearing you talk about these things, like you've been, it sounds like pretty purpose driven or seeking that, and whether knowing you weren't happy and it wasn't the right thing, and it's been a journey. But tell us what you're doing now, and I'd love to then, as after you explain what it is, if you can talk to us about how you got there, because I think that journey is going to be so rich.
So I worked at Zimments, same day delivery. And that was when it was 2012 is when I started. That's when it was super hot, right? Like with Amazon, everybody was talking about it. And funny enough, I knew at the time, I knew nothing about, I mean, I used e-commerce, but I knew nothing about e-commerce, nothing about logistics, I had no idea what I was doing. Landed in New York, and it turns out I was pretty good at it, and I had kind of, again, to use the word I carved out a space, like of something where I knew how to build out new systems for companies that would, A, be differentiating, and B, not make them lose money. Were two very important tenets for me personally. So Zimments got acquired, and the founders of Casper had known me for Zimments, and they had reached out and said, hey, can you help us out? We're really into building out an ownable delivery service for Casper. So I did that, and that turned into Casper White Glove. We built that out into 4 markets, and with that included returns. And again, my first foray into e-commerce returns. Going back, I knew nothing about it, and I didn't realize what a massive problem it was until I started working with Casper and seeing the implications. I mean, not just with mattresses, but as e-commerce continued to grow as, sort of the default buying channel for customers. So did that, and then just Casper opened up a bunch of opportunities for me. So I, got pinged by a ton of companies, and almost all of them wanted me to join full time. And I always said, like, no, I want to do my own thing. So a few years ago, I started a return software company, Atomic Returns. And I always say, I mean, in hindsight, my biggest mistake there was starting that 4 years too late. When I came on board, there was Loop Returns, Happy Returns, Returnly, and all those guys, like, that were really well funded. I mean, that, honestly, that was a lesson for me too. I mean, I was always I think because I was daunted and scared, I was always very halting about launching. And it is true when people say, just do it, just like do it, you'll figure it out, but like do something. I was always very halting. And I just, like I said, my biggest mistake was 4 years, because it was always this like game of catch up. A year and a half ago, a couple of years ago, I started brainstorming, okay, like, is there another, because I knew the returns problem is so massive. It's still massive. Like, people have been trying to solve this thing for like at least a decade. One of the brands using our software came to me and said, the software's not the problem. There's a lot of software. We just don't know what to do with the stuff coming back.
Just to be like crystal clear for our audience, the problem is what? What's the problem in returns? Like it's, we're all so used to buying things, and it's just magic. Like Amazon will take everything back. Like, what's the problem?
I mean, there's a massive overhead cost associated with e-commerce returns, right? And I think initially when e-commerce came out, I mean, a lot of people is like, oh, it's a streamlined way of doing business. You don't have the overhead of brick and mortar. And then when you start to layer in a lot of costs associated with it, including, customer acquisition, but logistics, so expensive. So the issue with returns is because, people with e-commerce, generally, they're not buying in real life. So apparel is probably the one where it hurts the most, because people buy 3 and return 2 or that. Like returns is so intrinsic into the buying process, versus I think with brick and mortar, it was always an exception. I think returns for e-commerce, definitely with certain categories, but it's so intrinsic to how people buy and shop and what their expectations are. And that just drives up costs for a lot of brands and retailers. And that's not even talking like all the sustainability issues, which is another thing.
Yeah, it's a whole nother thing. But so you've got a client that's coming to you and say, hey, look, it's not a software problem. I just don't know what to do. I got all this stuff. Like once it comes back to me, what do I do with it? Help me solve that problem.
Right. I mean, and software addresser, what all the software was addressing was at the time, which was a problem, but now there's really great software to address it, was the consumer facing side. Like how can they be self-directed to manage that? Because prior to all the great returns companies coming, the return software coming on board, it was very manual for service. So that addressed the consumer facing side or the consumer initiation side. But the physical product, and I've always said this too, I think it's not even on my LinkedIn, like e-commerce, like there's so much focus on what happens online. I think, and now there's a lot of focus on it, with 3PL and logistics and fulfillment, is that the making offline just as nimble and quick and efficient as what happens online is really important.
There's a lesson that you shared as you were leading and kind of telling your story that I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just put a circle around it. Like your two tenets of success: create differentiation, don't lose money. Like those are, if I think of principles of entrepreneurship or principles of creating success within an organization, I love those as critical success factors of answering those questions. How do we differentiate, and how do we actually make money at doing this thing? Which is, there's no shame in making money. That's why business exists, right?
No.
But it's really hard to do, and you've got to find ways to create value. So tell me about Comeback Goods. What do you guys do today? Where has it evolved? You've taken and you started to solve this problem of what to do with the stuff when it comes back.
Yeah, so we did a bunch of consumer research, and I still remember this. We had a landing page. I had zero product, by the way, like zero product, right? So we came up with it. We just threw into a landing page with like a email sign up form, and we tested all these different angles. And the one that rose to the top, like head and shoulders, is what you see on the site today, is get products with tiny imperfections and get huge savings at the same time, which was really interesting to me because it wasn't just about saving money. It wasn't just about sustainability. It wasn't like, join a club or like Costco or like Guild Group. Like it was the idea of, wow, like there's things with like tiny little imperfections out there that is new news to a lot of people who, maybe aren't in e-commerce, but that I could buy one of those things and get a great deal and feel good about it also. Mm-hmm. So started out with that, launched with a couple of brands, spent, almost a year recruiting a bunch of brands. A lot of them you see on the site right now. And what it's evolved into, and, it's just funny how, they always say a founder, like their personality gets wrapped up into the business also, right? And what it's evolved into, which I love, is the idea of like almost perfect. Like things are almost perfect, but they're still like loved and deserving of a chance and all that. And I think it resonates with so many people. Like people love that idea because I don't know, especially, and I've always said Comeback Goods is like the weird cousin of direct to consumer, because for so long in the heyday, everyone was focused on like very polished brands. And I think we have a really strong brand, but it's okay to have a little blemish here and there. And it's okay for that. And so we've really leaned into that message with all of our communications and marketing. And, eventually, like when we bought social talks about that, it's resonated with people, I think, differently than just saying like, hey, buy an open box item and get 40% off.
Yeah, you're not just selling a deal. You're selling something that's, got a story behind it, got some emotional attachment. Like, I don't know, it feels like if you're just buying a deal, it's just commoditized, but somehow you're making it the story, which I think is super cool. And there's a sustainability impact here. And there's it's a real problem, like returns. The numbers far better than I do, but like, I think I remember reading somewhere between like 30 and 40% of everything sold in e-commerce ends up being returned. And certainly for apparel, that's even higher. But It's just fascinating. And there's got to be an outlet for this stuff. It can't all go in a landfill, and it shouldn't go in a landfill.
I mean, I think so. And it's not just returns, right? So we're focused squarely on home goods and hard goods because I think apparel is like too congested and ugly. So truthfully, the return rate for home goods and hard goods is lower. It's probably up 10%, but the costs the cost and headache, as you can imagine, are incredibly acute. If you think about the size, the AOV for a home good item versus apparel, the logistics costs associated with home goods, and then even just space that it takes up. You can't fold up a desk, like with apparel, you can like kind of stack it, but like you can't fold that thing up. So that's why I focus squarely on home goods, because I think it's an undertapped opportunity, even though people have done it. But to your point, how people have talked about, it's not just returns. It could be like a box that gets dinged in the warehouse. I mean, you've been over in the business, like a box that got dinged or it gets stabbed, or, maybe there's a slight scratch underneath a pan that's not good enough for the primary channel, but like more than good enough for somewhere else. That is something that we get really excited about.
And you're right. I've seen this stuff, and you're sitting there going, man, that can't be sold in primary channel, but it's still a perfectly good product that's perfectly usable and needs a home, and then someone can get it and save some money while they're doing it. It's super cool. Let me ask you something. Are you leading off of instinct? I mean, you've got the vision, you've built the thing, but most leaders I talk to are still flying without a system. Vision to Victory, the mastermind, changes that. It's a 12-week experience where we install the leadership operating system you've always needed: purpose, strategy, cadence, metrics, execution. This isn't a course. It's not more content. It's a small group of leaders who are done chasing clarity and ready to lead with it. You'll walk out with a full leadership operating system, a trusted circle of peers, and a repeatable way to scale without losing yourself along the way. There are only 12 seats in this group, and most are already spoken for. It's an application-only process. Go to arcusgroup.com/mastermind to apply. When you started Comeback Goods, is what you're doing today what you thought you'd be doing, or like how many iterations on a theme or twists and turns has this journey taken you on?
Yeah, I mean, quite a bit. I will say, I mean, the core of it is still the same. I think the message, I didn't realize how strongly the message would resonate with people. I mean, I knew it were involved in tests. And then there's different ways you could, you can lean really into like an imperfect movement, or you could lean really, or into sustainability. So we played around with that. But I didn't realize how much the idea of tiny imperfections and get savings and feel good about it. I mean, our community is still pretty small, but it turned into a little micro movement online, which is kind of cool to see. And I think because it's more about being smart, it's not just about getting a deal, right? Even though it's smart, it's about almost feeling like you beat the system a little bit, kind of like an inside knowledge. And I think that's just, in the category, it hasn't been talked about the right way, in my opinion. Like I said, you can talk about, yes, open, that's been done for decades, right? You can talk about open box and get a deal, and, even the term rescue, I don't like, because that's overused, rescue these items and blah, blah, blah. But I don't know. There is something, and I can't even articulate it appropriately now because it's still evolving, but there is something to recognizing that there are imperfect products and being able to see they might not be right for this channel, but they could be right certainly for somewhere else. So getting back to your question too, we've seen there's a huge emerging channel in the B2B segment. So for example, short-term rental owners are finding our interesting. We've got a lot of inbounds from that. We've gotten a lot of small business people reaching out. I'm very fascinated by what B2B side we could unlock with this.
Well, that's a really interesting channel expansion when you start thinking about short-term rental owners. Like if I've got 10 properties or 20 properties, I don't necessarily need primary channel, if I can take advantage of or get something, it's gonna get scratched, or it's gonna get but I need 10 or 20 of them, but I want top rate quality. I want really good stuff because it reinforces my rental brand. This is a perfect channel for that. Well, we're going to make sure we put a link in the show notes for Comeback Goods, and I'd encourage everyone to check it out. I've been a customer. I love the kind of the fun, and you touched on this at the very beginning, like the fun of writing. And you may not like writing, but I think if you're doing any of the writing, I like the fun in the writing that I see in the marketing, because it is, I wouldn't say it's snarky, but it's real. It's got personality, and I love reading things that have a personality to them, which is certainly what I would say Comeback Goods does. One thing that strikes me, Liesl, as you've been talking and you've mentioned people that have dropped pearls of wisdom or nuggets or created connections for you, is that you've done a really good job of building a network of advisors or of people that you listen to, that you engage with, and you get perspective and insights from. Has that been like an intentionally curated thing, or is that just a natural thing that you kind of have done organically? But it really seems like you do a great job of building an informal network or a formal network of people to gain experiences from, to gain insights from.
Thanks for saying that. I don't know. I don't know if it was so much it's been fairly organic for me, only because I've had the fortune of working at some cool companies. A guy that I worked with at Casper, he's helping me out. This is way back, and it feels like a lifetime ago. We worked together at Casper to launch White Glove, and he was on the engineering side. And because we just worked so well together and had a great rapport and stay friends, he's helping me out with some sticky things that we're doing with our back office and the software and integrations and things like that. Intentional. I don't know if it was intentional. I will say I've always been much more, I value depth versus breadth, even though I meet a lot of people and all that and get yourself out there. And I get that, but I have never been that person that wants to collect business cards, so to speak. I really like meeting fewer people and trying to build a relationship over time. And a lot of that has been the companies I worked with and meeting people there. And I've made a ton of friends, and I think a lot of it was just sort of organic for us. And it goes both ways. You get what you give. And you also, another cliche, but it's a truism also, is just that, you like attracts like. And I think you tend to attract people at your wavelength. And they always say that you earn your place. So what's that saying that when you're, I don't know if Yoda said it, it's like when you're ready, then the opportunity presents itself. I think it's like that with people. It's like when you're ready, it's like the right people will present themselves,
I agree with you, and also just know that you've been very giving, and invest into you do get what you give. If you're out there to extract value from every relationship in a maximal way, people will see through that, and then they'll run when they see you coming, because they just know you're coming to ask. But if you're just showing up authentically, and you and I've known each other for a couple of years now, and I've always treasured our conversations because I know I'm going to walk away a little smarter with some ideas I didn't know or thoughts I didn't have before, because you're going to create value. And I think that that's part of what people who are purpose-driven, value-centric do, and does attract and it really creates an exponential impact, right? It's not one-to-one. But when you surround yourself with great like-minded people who don't necessarily, we're not talking about thinking the same. We're not talking about an echo chamber, but we're talking about who are purpose-centric, or like purpose-minded. You can really go back to what you said at the very beginning. If they're self-aware and willing to grow and lean in, it just can become an exponential value creator.
It's self-awareness, but also just being present. I truly, friends have said this about me, but I also, I truly get super curious. I like learning about what people do and about them as people, and just being, and there's so much, and I understand people, we have a business to build. There's so much out there where it's everybody is just sort of, as you said, out for themselves or very self-involved. But putting the phone down and being present and just truly like trying to learn about somebody else, I think is worthwhile. And there's a lot of value in that.
There really is. I mean, I'll be completely transparent. It's one of my motivations with having this podcast is I get to learn about really interesting people. And yes, I want, others to hear their stories. And yes, I want others to get value out of their journey. But frankly, I like the conversations. It's a way of sharpening my saw. And, I've got a page of notes here, the things that I'm going to be thinking about based on our conversation. And it's fun. It's what creates value. I mean, we're only here for a little while. We might as well create some value while we're doing it. Liesl, I want to shift this a little bit, and I want to talk about, I've got some rapid recall questions, rapid fire questions I want to get your perspective on. And I didn't send these to you in advance. I'm not meaning to throw you curveballs, maybe a little bit, but these are fun. So I want to get your reaction to these.
Okay.
First off, I'm really curious on this one. What is a book that you think everyone should read?
Gee, that's a hard one. Honestly, that's a really hard one, only because I feel like I've read so many books in the past. Actually, I'm going to say this one, and it's not going to sound the most intellectual, but we just got it recently. I like it, and people have probably heard of it. It's called Good People.
I have not heard of that. No.
It's written by, and this is, like I said, it's not going to, I wish I had something like smarter, like a cool biography or something like that, like smart, but we literally just got it like 2 weeks ago. It's a book called Good People. It came out of that Instagram account, Upworthy. Do you know Upworthy? So it basically just talks about like story. I mean, their whole like ethos is showing the best of humanity. And so they just have all these posts that just are really sort of heartwarming stories. And I guess last year they came up with a book that they took because they got so many comments from each post, and they compiled it and turned it into a book called Good People. And it's just, they're short, and the stories are different, unexpected, certainly heartfelt, a little sentimental, but it just reminds you that people are generally good. And that's the whole premise of the book. So I think people should read that.
You learn a lot about people by what they're reading, and there can be recency bias. There can be, a book that you read when you were 6 that I've had people talk about that. I love learning what people are reading, whether it's one book or 100 books. I'm glad you didn't ask me that question because I'd probably not be able to answer it very quickly either. And because
I wish I was
fun.
reading more, because I feel like I don't know if you had this when you were a CEO. Like I feel like I'm not reading a lot. I'm not reading books. I feel like I read like a ton of blog posts, a ton of articles and all that, but I'm not reading a lot. I used to read so much, especially as a history major. Like, that's why it's hard to pick one to think, like biographies or just Peter the Great book. And, but that's a recent one. I think just because it's easy to read and it's fortifying and it's incredibly relevant now. So.
Well, I don't know if you've seen this. I agree. And I love to read and I enjoy reading. I'll fully admit that sometimes my reading can be audiobooks now because I can do it when I'm, in a car or on an airplane or something. But it's interesting. I've noticed that it's harder for me to read with long sections like I used to love, like curling up with a good book for an hour. And now I don't know if our brains have been trained from a distraction basis with our devices and all those other things, but like just losing yourself in a good book is harder to do cognitively, at least for me, than it used to be.
Yeah. I could see that. And I have a whole stack of books, that I absolutely had loved, and though I've been meaning to pick up, and it's just hard to it's just like you have so many things, like I have so many things I want to read that are competing. You're probably like that. And, maybe it's just a couple pages here or a couple, blog posts here. And, it's hard to make time for all of them.
It's hard to make time for all of them. Well, there's gonna be more books than we can ever read in our lifetime. So
I know,
just carving out a few minutes. It is sad. I know personally, I make it part of my morning routine to read for, even if it's only 10 minutes, I'm going to read something, not a blog, not an article, but I'm going to read a book. And it forces me to do something I love, which is crazy that I have to force myself. All right. What's the best leadership advice you've ever been given?
I might come up with a better one later on, but I'm going to go back to what my friend said to me which is always follow up.
Mm.
Okay, you do that, and that's not just. I mean, that can take a bunch of different, interpretations or terms, but always follow up, meaning that always just show up, like right. And I think because a lot of people don't, and I know time becomes an issue as you get busier and life happens, and just work gets busier. But I think always follow up, and that could even, I mean, that even mean for the people that work for you too,
Hmm.
following up and, just like sort of checking in partners.
Yeah, I really like that from a leadership principle perspective. If your team knows that you're going to follow up, you are going to curate a culture of accountability. They just know it's coming, and it doesn't become it's not a negative thing. It's just, hey, this is the way we do things around here. We always follow up. And that means we honor our commitments. That means we operate with integrity. That means we do all of those things.
Some of the busiest people I know, like founders who are, who run huge businesses, there are a handful that I know if I send them an email, I would always get a response back. It may not be like immediately, but I would always get a response back. And I mean, how great is that if we could have that reputation among everybody? So that's what I would say.
Cool. What's a podcast you're listening to right now, or any particular things that you're exploring and learning about?
Oh God, there's a bunch. I mean, I've been listening to, and I can't remember the name, but I have been listening to a lot of growth podcasts
Mm.
in general because, it kind of goes back to, I think when I started Comeback, I got a lot of feedback from people that, Liesl, your background is in logistics and back office software. Your background's not about creating an e-commerce brand. Like that's not that's right. That's not who you are, right? That was a lot of feedback from investors on that, right? So it's amazing to me, and I love the fact that you love our marketing emails because I take a hand in writing each and one of them, because I was like, you know what, I can do, and that's a lesson for every founder, by the way. It's like, yeah, you can do this. Like it's never too late to do a pivot on what you think you are, what you're good at. And so I've been going back, I've been listening to a lot of like e-commerce growth podcasts, like from growth leaders, how they look at different channels and how they account for them and what the KPIs are. It's something I had, again, going 10 years ago, I knew nothing about logistics. 15 years ago, knew nothing about e-commerce growth a year ago. And now I know a lot about it.
Yeah, I love that you're not just allowing someone else's label or definition of what they think you know to define who you are and what you're going to do. But it doesn't happen just by saying, hey, I wish I could. You go study, you go learn, you go surround yourself with information you ingest so that you can, going back to what you said very early on, like you can form an opinion. You can build something where you understand something and know what's going on there. That's cool. What's an organization that you are passionate about supporting? So outside of the work world, do you have any organizations or things that you are passionate about supporting?
So I love this idea that we are getting, if anyone hears this, you guys is it, but like I would love to work with organizations I'm going to back up. Organizations that help people help themselves. One of them that I recently got connected with that I'm super keen on working with Comeback on is Habitat for Humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It giving people, not just giving people things to set them up, but empowering them. So Habitat for Humanity is one of them. The second one that I really love, and there's a few of them out there, but the one in New York that is called Ready, Willing, and Able. So it empowers like previously, homeless people or people who may have been incarcerated and giving them jobs. And it's under the umbrella of Ready, Willing, and Able. And I don't know, I wish I knew more about it, but that was always something that struck me because I love the idea of giving people agency and it's confident, not just confidence, but it's empowerment, it's self-sufficiency. that to me, I really love. And Habitat falls into that also. Like I would love Comeback Goods to support that in some way. We've had some interest there, but that's sort of the theme of organizations I love.
That's awesome. We'll put links to both of those in the show notes for listeners who are also intrigued by that. I like that you choose the word agency. When you give people the opportunity to take agency over their decisions, to not be defined by or to not be limited by what has happened in their lives, but to take steps and act on and create, have agency over what's going to happen next. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be fairy tale. They just get to choose. And that's really, really incredible and powerful. How can our listeners find out more about you or about Comeback Goods?
Well, Comeback Goods, you can just go to the site, which you'll put the link on, Comeback Goods.
Yep.
And then, nowadays my LinkedIn is probably the latest. I wish I did have a blog and then I never do anything with it, but my LinkedIn is probably where it gives my background, but those are the two primary channels.
Awesome. Well, if you could leave our listeners, our leaders who are listening, one final thought about growth, resilience, entrepreneurial journey, being a founder, what pearl of wisdom or what would you want folks to walk away with having listened to this conversation?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm just going to slide it in because you said something that made me think of it. Like when you said agency, I think another, I don't know if it's tenet, but it's like one thing it all ties together. But I think my dad said this to me. He was like, and it's all related. He was like, every job is honorable as long as it's an honest living. First of all, I think every kid, I might have said this to you, Dusty, I think every kid should have a service job as soon as they're able to, because I think it teaches you how to treat people. My dad definitely believed in that. He's like, every job is honorable as long as it's an honest living. I think related to that about agency is I think everyone should be given the integrity of their choices. That's how I see it, just like whether it's friends or people I work with or people that work for us, like everyone should have the integrity of their choices, so not to be made to feel dumb or wrong or any. So, and it goes back to those causes that I'm really into because I think that's part of it also.
Connecting the dots so that people can have a purpose and a passion and you can enable them to connect those dots and have integrity in their choices and knowing they're making the right choices. Your dad sounds like he was a very wise man and has given you and given us some great pearls. So I'm really thankful that you shared some of his story and some of his lessons with us today. This has been such a pleasurable conversation. Thank you so much. I knew it would be. And I'm just very, very indebted to you for investing your time here. I do hope our audience takes some time to check out Comeback Goods. And I'll have even more fun now knowing that you are part of the marketing voice in those messages. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for making a difference in our world together.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much, Dusty.
Hey, before you go, if this episode helped you see leadership differently, I have 3 personal requests. First, and this is the most important one, share this with one leader who needs it. Think of someone in your network who's frustrated with their team's execution or is trying to scale their own impact. Copy this episode link right now and text them, hey, I just listened to this episode and I think you'll get real value from it. That simple act of sharing, that is servant leadership in action. Second, subscribe to Leadership Unlocked. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast player, just hit subscribe or the follow button. That way you won't miss the next episode and it helps us reach more leaders like you. And third, if you're willing, this would be a huge help for us. Leave a 5-star rating and write a quick review. I know it takes 60 seconds of your time, but here's what it does. It helps other leaders discover the show. Every rating, every review, it's how we expand our impact together. So those 3 things, share with a friend, subscribe, leave a review. I'm deeply appreciative and that would give us so much help. Thanks for being part of the Leadership Unlocked community. Now go create some clarity for others.